What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Sundays Coming podcast. Super excited for today's episode because we have my best friend, Mr. Stephen Hull here. We're gonna have a blast, man. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here. Yeah,
we're stoked to have you. I was, before we started, we were talking about like when the crap did I meet you for the first time? 2018 was probably the first time we hung out at a Halsey show. Hung out on the bus. Yeah, really got to see like a real touring person do their thing, and it was pretty freaking awesome. Mm-hmm. But I did remember earlier this morning when I was driving in, very close to that, or like right before that, you showed up at the chapel where I was working, Christmas Eve, and I'll never forget because like you have a very like out of all of the church people dressed for church Christmas Eve services. You looked exactly like you look right now. Exactly.
So tech person.
Tech person. I was like, he's probably does something in tech. And I was wearing my in-ears, and you like walked up to me, you're like, "Hey man, what you got there? JH 1964 Ultimate ears?" And I'm like, "Oh, they're JH Audio." And we're just laughing about my in-ears. I'm like, "Who is this guy talking to me about my in-ears and how good they are?" So, anyways, that's how we are. But man, we've had a lot of fun stories together, and I'm excited to have you on here because you have a really interesting and unique picture into what you're doing in ministry today. Working really at Passion City in Atlanta, their Trillith campus, and doing a bunch of other stuff with the organization you work for. And so we're just kind of stoked to hear a little bit about what your what your history has been. So for the people that don't know, because I know a lot,
sure.
What's your like kind of background, at least in general, leading up into the point where you're kind of leading into not only the touring world, then into ministry and all this stuff, and then kind of, we'll kind of see where things go.
Yeah. So kind of tell a little bit about my backstory. Like other technical people, I was a musician at one point. Started playing music when I was young, took piano lessons, did the drummer on the drum line in high school, and then, tried my best at it. Actually did do okay. Grew up in Detroit, Michigan. Met a group of guys out there that actually shared that same amount of passion of doing live shows and playing music, and put a band together and hit the road back in, I think it was like 2012, 13, something.
So it was a ska band, probably.
It was not a ska band. It was
we were. How old were you though? Because I feel like you were like
we started late in the game. So like truly, like we started playing a lot of what you hear at like the Warped Tour, like pop punk music, and we were in our like early 20s when we started, and by the time we started actually catching any sort of wave of success, we're like in our mid 20s, which is like late for that genre.
We're like old dudes. The rest of the people.
It was interesting, but that gave us. It gives us a lot more drive and like I guess wisdom in that sense. We're just young dumb kids trying to like make it work. We actually tried to make a business out of it. Did that for a while. Ended up getting a record deal with Tooth and Nail Records, and did that for about 2.5 records with them. Then got to a point where we kind of got to our mid to late 20s and kind of realized, hey, this doesn't really pay the bills,
What?
So,
music doesn't make money?
No, it does if you're okay with living on your friend's couch for the rest of your life. But at the same time, you can do well. There's plenty of opportunities and avenues now, but it wasn't for me. I'd say that. So. Got a call from one of my buddies who was also in a band here in Chicago at the time, and asked me to come. Said, "Hey, I know that you weren't kind of thinking about getting out of the playing the music thing. Would you want to come try some technical things?" And I was kind of that guy for my band. I was the guy recording our demos in our basement, learning how to use Logic and what's a plugin and all those kind of things. And so I kind of had some technical aspects already kind of built into what I was doing. So it was kind of a no-brainer. I was like, sure, I'll hit the road. Like basically I get to go on tour now again, but I get a paycheck this time. Yeah. This is great, And I think I started like working for a band. It was like $300 a week.
Who was that with?
Worked for the first band I went on tour with. It's a band called Parachute. From Charlottesville, Virginia.
Classic.
And going on all that.
Oh yeah, I started.
I tell you, it was quite the experience because those guys are like true brothers to me, and I've known those guys for years. I still talk to the singer and the guitar player like a lot. So, just good humans. And I did that for about 2.5 years with them, and they kind of came to a point in record cycle where they had to take a break. So I started kind of jumping from gig to gig and doing some other things, and just I think kept my head down and worked hard, and ended up getting a lot more calls to do other artists, and that's kind of how I got to got the call from actually that same guy to come go work for Halsey back in her first record when it dropped, Badlands. I think it was 2016.
Yeah.
2016. I got hired on to be her modern engineer and stage manager, backline guy, basically everything stage. And did that for about 2.5 years. And then we met.
Not soon after that.
Yeah.
That's crazy, man.
Yep. But we met and I came into Chicago and invited you to a show. And I was like, hey, man, you want to see some cool stuff?
So I don't know if we've actually ever talked about this. I've always felt, I never did like the real touring thing. I did like one-off weekend warrior stuff for small bands and, but not real stuff like that. But I always felt like I'm faking it until I make it in every scenario. And it was always like I'm surrounded by people who quote unquote know what they're doing. But then like, I think as I've gotten older, I feel like everybody is doing the exact same thing as what I was thinking of, like just figuring it out and like kind of acting like you knew what you know, like how to do whatever you were doing on the, you know, when you're part of the crew. Do you feel like that was the same? Like when you jumped into touring for the first time?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I came from a guy who had long blonde hair, like past his chin. And I was like, how do I plug stuff in? And for the longest time, I was like, man, somebody's going to figure me out. Like they're going to realize I'm not that good at this. You know what I mean? But it just goes to show like the technical role, especially in the touring world, it's not just about your technical skill and like your creative passions, but it's also about how hard you work and like how much you're willing to learn. So, I mean, you go further in that business, the more integrity you have around getting better, but also the other half of that is being just a real person, you know, somebody that they can live, you know, 3 months out of the year in a bus with you and be comfortable with you and have an actual relationship with. So it's like, it's not just about how good you are technically, but also how great of a hang you are and how good of a person you are. So I think I had those two things going for me, and that kind of disguised the fact that I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So
the hang thing is so real though. And I feel like that's in every single area of career, ministry, touring. It's just like, dude, if I can't hang with you, like I don't care at all how good you are at your skill. If you're an idiot, if you're not
like fun to hang
out with,
you're a little bit.
I'm a lot of that, and people still put up with it. But you know, it's a real thing. The hang is like, that makes a massive difference.
Oh, I'd be curious now, like thinking about those days on the road, like what have you found to be the most directly transferable skills or like experiences to what you're doing now? As you're thinking about like, wow, even though I'm in a different context, I'm in a church context, I'm in a, you know, it's not a tour, but like there are things I imagine that, you know, it's like kind of the same thing. And a lot of the skills and approaches that made you win on the road kind of help in that context as well.
From a technical standpoint, prioritization of certain things, you know, I think understanding creative integrity around like the production things you're doing for a show, and kind of understanding where the artist wants to take it, how to get it there. Those things are still very...
Yeah, say more about that. When you say creative integrity, flesh that out a little bit. Like, what does that mean to you, and how does it translate to like your work with an artist?
I think, I think an artist comes to you and says, hey, I want to do this crazy thing where when I say this word into a microphone and everything just completely does it, but it's got to be based upon when I say that word.
Right.
And then you get with your technical team and you're saying, okay, how do we make this work within technical elements that we have in front of us? You know what I mean? So kind of approaching those situations and being like, okay, here's option A, B, and C, what we're thinking to do. And I'm sure the artist is never going to understand what you're trying to tell them. But once you get with like your technical team, you show the artist that you can do this within the tools you're given or with a couple additional things. I mean, having that, like just that mentality of how do we figure this out? How do we do it technically to create that vision of the artist and execute it well, goes a long way. I think just owning that and coming up with great ways to do it.
Yeah. And it's also like not listing all the reasons why you can't do that or why that's going to be a problem.
Oh gosh.
But like how you come to the table with solutions and with a win. Like maybe it's like, hey, you know, we can't do it this way, but if we slightly modify it, here's how it's going to work and be a win for the idea.
Just be open-minded. I think any artist on the road wants to know that their technical team is also sharing the vision they have too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Don't just show up and do a gig and, you know, go to catering and okay, rigs up, I'm good to go for the day. You know what I mean? Like share that integrity with your artists and you'll have a job forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I feel like as I started to get to know you and I like felt the lingo like rub off from the artist standpoint. Like I used to hear you say like, oh, it's, you know, we're just doing like what the artist wants or, you know, whatever. And it was like, I think early on hard for me to translate like you referring to an artist and me trying to put my own self in my context in ministry and go, yeah, but is like my worship pastor like the artist or is my senior pastor the artist? And I didn't, it was like this like thing that it gave me like the ick of like, oh, I don't like the verbiage of that. But it was so true of like the same kind of mentality of going like, dude, it's not like, why am I walking into a conversation saying no or leading with the reasons why it's not going to work? Because like, you don't do that in the touring world. You just don't, or corporate or any show, whatever. It's like, yep, we got it. Like, we'll figure it out, you know? And so it's like, for some reason there's a mentality that like, it's okay to lead with, I don't think that's going to be possible for some reason in ministry or a lot of other contexts, you know?
Sure.
But yeah, the whole like artist mentality is like fascinating to me because I see that happen. And then I think even for you now at Passion City, it's also like interesting because like, you know, Passion is a large worship and writing culture and have actual true artists that are touring on their own outside of just working at the church, dude. So that's like, that's also super interesting too from that standpoint.
Well, maybe segue in. Let's kind of speed up to where you're at now in Passion. What do you do? How does that work? Like, what's your role on the team there, week in and week out?
Yep. So, after I came off the road, was working, got into church ministry. That was kind of the next move. Is kind of, I was like, hey, you know, I'm gone all the time. Want to be around my family, and I asked Caleb, and he said, "Hey, man, we'll get you in this church thing and see what it's like." And I was Christian at the time, but
did it make more or less money than being in the band?
For sure, less. But you know, it was worth it. You know what I mean? It was an opportunity for me to kind of really develop my personal relationship with Jesus, and then kind of going after that. But then also kind of use my skill set to kind of hopefully help this church that was at the time. So stepped into that and I fell in love with it, saw the like Holy Spirit move in a lot of special ways throughout that time, and kind of just had that same like, man, this is something special. I want to stick to this. So I was doing church ministry here in Chicago for a while. Took a job at a corporate events company, doing corporate events to kind of keep my technical skills up and learn more. And then, I think I got the call about a year and a half ago, and then opportunity to go work for a company out of Nashville called 46 Entertainment, which now I'm a production manager full time for. And my role is basically to production manage Passion Trillith, is their southern campus in southern Atlanta. So I do that full time now. I manage that campus with a team of people from 46 as well as some other contractors, and we kind of basically just tackle that entire space so that the church can not have to worry about that campus, but also know that it's in good hands.
So for the people that don't know what Trillith is or the uniqueness of it, because I remember the first time I went down there, I was like, oh my gosh, this is unlike any church that I've ever seen because of the location. Like, explain where it is, where it's kind of, you know, sitting inside of, and you know, any details you can.
It's definitely, it's so funny because most people even in Atlanta don't know about it until they go there and they say the same thing. So it's in Fayetteville, Georgia, which is about 25 minutes south of downtown, 30 minutes depending on traffic, or maybe longer. But it used to be old Pinewood Studios, which is was a premier movie studio in Georgia. And then the owner of Chick-fil-A, Dan Cathy, kind of took on that real estate and that property and has kind of developed it into this longevity, long-term thing. Marvel shoots there. You know, all DC is potentially coming there in the next year or so.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if I can say that, but anyways, there's currently 24 50,000 square foot sound stages there on the property, and they're building another 8 right now. They're supposed to be done by the end of the year. I mean, this place is. I mean, it's just developing like crazy. I mean, they're building server farms for Amazon down the road, and that whole district of Trillith is very much centered around creativity, and so the entire integrity is bringing things that are massively creative and inspiring into Southern Atlanta, and just kind of letting that develop.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome.
Well, I was going to kind of flesh out, like, how do you see that sort of ethos and culture of the area around you kind of influencing just what you guys are doing at that campus, and sort of just how you approach different elements or the people that are there, or that kind of stuff?
It's definitely interesting because our campus at Trillith is not like the other 2 campuses in Atlanta for Passion. They have the buildings are there. They're kind of more like integrated systems, and for where it is at Trillith, it's basically just a big black box. Yeah. So a lot of the gear and equipment there is like a touring style of equipment and kind of deployment. which gives us a lot of advantage because we can kind of alter that space as needed weekly, which is kind of what I'm doing now. So
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's definitely different for the church. I know it's a lot of out of their normal, which is kind of why they've brought us in with their partnership to kind of like lead that, because the company I'm with currently experiences a lot of that and does a lot of that, and I have also. So.
Yeah. And so how much week to week is there regularly set up and tear down? Are you clearing for events, or is it you're mostly up and then sometimes have to clear for other things, or how does that all work?
Yes, it used to be. So Passion used to do one service a month down there, where we'd come in, load it in on a Saturday, do a rehearsal, do Sunday morning service, and then we'd load it out all day Sunday afternoon. So we'd fill a couple of semi-trucks and run gear
That's
back and forth
crazy,
to
dude.
Nashville. And it was nuts for a while there. And then we got to a spot in a good relationship with the town where they built a specific soundstage just for events like this. Moved Passion into that building, and then we basically deployed an entire system and a design for that, and gets to stay in there from week to week, which is a lot less moving parts. But in that, we also partner with the town to do a lot of other events within that space. So we're constantly modifying and pulling out large risers and seated risers, and clearing the floor, completely redoing stage designs almost every week. So
Wow.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I like the first time I walked in there, like you had only told me about it, and I had like seen pictures, you post on like Instagram or whatever of like Sunday. And I'm like, looks like a church. Like like the context of the photos that I had seen was nothing like what I experienced when I walked in there. And it's like, I'd never been in a soundstage like that, of that scale. And it's very like unassuming when you drive up. You're like, you're in like a weird, like kind of complex looking thing where you're like, I know that there's more of these over there. You can see all the, buildings, but then you walk in, you're like, this is a giant box that has like the most acoustic treatment I've ever seen. It's like dead in there, and enormous ceilings, more steel than you could ever imagine to, all your rigging points and all of the crazy stuff that, I got to experience. And so it's like, it's so unique too, because I mean, it was just in September that I went to the main campus of Passion for the first time. I'd never been there, and went there for a conference, and I'm like, this is awesome. Like, it was a beautiful campus. And so it's so unique compared to like what that main campus looks like, for you guys right now in Trillith, and like the setup and, tear down of all that stuff, on a weekly basis.
They're different spaces, but I would say that Passion does a great job of making sure that their standards are kind of meet across all campuses, not just from like a visual and like an aesthetic standpoint, but also from a technical standpoint. Like, they really are integrous around how their systems are put together and how they're deployed and the things that they can do, so that they're all kind of in one flow. So anybody can jump around from campus to campus and kind of have the same ability and same experience.
Yeah.
Well, maybe say more about that, because obviously, like, part of what allows you and your team and the church to put on these very complex services, plus whatever these sort of community events that are happening midweek and like kind of flow back and forth between them, is really thoughtful processes and strategies, ways of doing things that are consistent. So, like, maybe talk about what are some of the most key elements that kind of shape and define the way you guys think about planning, or even just like event production, that kind of keep all those very complex things moving in a smooth way.
I mean, I think it's integrity. I think it kind of just there's a lot of things I have to balance every week outside of just Passion Sundays. And so kind of really knowing who the players are that are also seeing your vision for what you're doing in that space, and kind of, it's all relationships. I mean, even with my generator vendors, and like even just my local AV company that's got the random little knickknacks that I need week to week, like showing them what you're doing there and kind of leading them in the vision of what we're doing here and the kind of what the goal is, and showing that like, this is a moving target. I need you on my side. Let's do this. It's going to be crazy. I'm going to ask for some crazy things. And then just kind of developing that relationship with those partners and being able to kind of create the space as they need it. So
it's almost like helping them all to make sure that they don't feel like just like this kind of second thought on the side, but like you're inviting them into the vision as like a key contributor to this kind of creative experience that you're putting on. And like, how do you make them, even if it's just something like you said, like, I need a couple DI boxes from you, whatever, but how does that relationship not make them feel like they're not important, but that they're like an integral part of your team?
100%. I mean, like the first time I walked into one of those little AV companies, that they do their own events, they do their own things. And I walked in. I didn't even send them an email. I just walked into their office one day and I said, "Hey, you guys are one of the closest like guys that I work with to my proximity. We're doing something really special down here," and kind of just gave them the vision of what we're doing. I said, "I'm going to ask you to do some crazy things. I'm looking for a partner who's willing to do that with me."
It's awesome.
And just having people in your local community that back you up in that sense. And I mean, Amplio, you guys are one of them for sure, not just in Chicagoland, but across the nation. You guys share that same vision with a lot of your clients. So having those partners in place was really, to answer your question, kind of helps me develop the space into what we need to be
I love that.
notice, you know?
And that's just like, it means you're prioritizing just so much more of like a outward focused mentality.
Yeah.
You're not just focused on like, what are my needs? What are the to-do list things that I've got, checking my boxes, but it's, you're thinking of others and considering their experience and like seeing the fruit of how much further that can go when you're thinking about sort of like the community and the team as a whole and not just your slice and how am I winning, but how are we all winning together?
Totally. But I will say it does depend on week to week. Some weeks I'm so busy, I'm just like, I just got to get this done, So.
But hopefully you've built up that relational equity that like when that happens, like, I mean, it's cool. You've got that.
I've got a great staging partner I can call and he would show up within a matter of hours with an entire stage if I needed to. Like
that's awesome.
That's how much people are believing in what we're doing there and want to jump on board. So thankful for it.
It's I feel like in ministry, I mean, early on, when I first started, this was 11 years ago in full-time ministry, like I feel like I wasn't willing to ask anybody for help around me. I wasn't even like willing to reach out to random vendors, in town. And, this is in St. Louis. And I knew a handful of these large production companies that were doing stuff. And I just I felt awkward to like try to ask and or bring them in because I felt small in what I was doing, or my thing was smaller than whatever thing that I was perceiving that this other organization or other church specifically, like there's so many great churches and people in the area that I was like not willing to reach out to because I felt like awkward that they're going to laugh at whatever crappy system or space I had, or does my teaching and my leadership align with what their, vision and values are and stuff like that. And so it's cool to see like other people in Atlanta from a very secular space outside of it now bringing that into like, hey, this is what we're doing here. And it's something like really special. And like even seeing, gosh, like, I don't know if it was on Christmas or maybe even Easter last year, you guys like, you posted pictures, you're like, dude, this place is like packed. And you're like, where all these people come from? Like you're in the middle of like, honestly, it's not Atlanta proper. It does not feel like it.
It's Fayetteville.
It is far. Like I remember driving, I'm like, where am I? And when am I going to get there? And getting there. And so it's like super unique. Do you feel like, and then, you have honestly the flip opposite of the main campus up in Buckhead, which is like north or, farther north side of Atlanta. Do you feel like maybe it's the congregation, the people, the staff or whatever that are serving at Trillith have that same kind of like ethos that, is carried throughout the other Passion locations? Or like, how has that been as you guys have launched, and how have you seen it like, I guess, develop or change, whether that's the staff or volunteers or people that are attending week to week to like feel the same, from a, very different location?
Yeah. It's a great question. Like I was kind of saying this earlier, but, Passion really is really great at making sure that they're kind of all one unit, one system, all together in alignment. So, especially for their congregants when they come, I mean, they want to create the same environment for worship and for meeting with Holy Spirit that happen at any one of their campuses. So, they've set very specific standards in place, and they've done a really good job of doing that. And that develops them to be able to. They even have like their door holders, which is basically like their volunteer team.
Yeah.
Be at any location. I mean, you can take a guy who's switching cameras at 5:15. He can jump down the Trillith, and he's got essentially the same layout, the same cameras, everything. So it's super helpful for them because they can step in and feel like they're doing their same job well in a totally different location. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel very different campus to campus. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, the teams at Passion is really good about also just like making sure that their campuses are unique in their own way. And I know that especially with Trillith, because it's so kind of south and different from the other two, the team that works there is very, very good at like kind of helping the local community as well. Cause I think their community is much different than the ones that the other campuses are.
Yeah.
There's a lot of creatives, a lot of people making movies. Like it's a very unique situation, but they're all struggling with the same things that, any person coming to church would. Yeah. So, it's definitely unique in its own way, but at the same time, it's like they're still pushing the same mission, which is Jesus Christ. So it's great.
That's interesting. I think it's so it's unique too because I feel like when you first started, Louis wasn't really teaching at Trillith at the time. Like it was really only a receive broadcast campus. Is that right? Or has it always been? Because he's like moving back and forth.
He would come now. Yeah, he would come about once a month, maybe once every 4 to 6 weeks, usually.
Okay.
And I think now that we kind of have like this kind of staple down there at Trillith and how much development is happening down there, and people are like, I mean, when we started that in town stage, which is the building we're in, we were about average 500 to 700 people a service, a gathering, and then now we're pushing upwards of 1,000 people every Sunday in less than a year, and it's growing like crazy. So we're moving to 2 services at the end of February. Which is great. And it's just, you see that happening. You see that growth are happening in such a short amount of time for the span of a church, And I think Louis also sees that happening and is now being integrated about coming down there and being specific with the people of Trillith. So he's coming down there more often, and it's definitely more of like an inviting experience for him to come down there and be able to be with those people. So
before we started, we were talking briefly about like this perception that I think so many people in ministry have when they're asked to do things that are above the normal week to week thing. I mean, the whole reason why like we wanted to start, I think, this podcast and even just like having some of these conversations, and the reason why the name is what it is because it's like Sundays do not stop coming. Like we've made that joke before. COVID didn't stop Sundays. Like it did not stop, and it never will. And I think because of that 6 days that happen in between a Sunday to Sunday, it's easy I have been in that. My teams have been in that over the last, decade. And like this complacency of like, dude, I only got 5 days and I'm only in the office 4 of them, or whatever it is. I don't want to like try to do this crazy stuff every week. We know that it's going to be like that in certain seasons or like as the ministry like year, sometimes that's in fall, sometimes it's, obviously in Christmas or Easter or whatever else, kind of thing that is. And it's easy for me to be like, I don't want to do those things. And Passion is so unique because from what I see from the outside, you guys are doing crazy stuff that churches aren't even doing on Christmas or Easter on a random Sunday in October or in July or whatever that is. And it's just because we just want to do it now. And how do you feel like you guys manage that, or what do you see from not only like your team there, but then also like the other Passion staff at other locations, and like how does a organization of that size continue to operate at such a high level and like come up with unique and creative things that aren't just happening for some conference or event or Christmas or Easter, like that on a weekly basis?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the whole mentality at Passion. I think anybody going to work at Passion kind of understands that like we're not just doing unique things around Christmas and Easter. We're doing it per talk series or, and it's all leading up to something. Yeah. And I think it just kind of stems from great leadership from Passion side. I mean, there's a lot of great creatives in place. A lot of their messages and sermons are kind of pushing around this, like this kind of 3 to 4 week plan, but within that, there's creativity to happen. So like, throwing an idea for this part of a sermon to do something that's we wouldn't do in a typical Sunday is not out of the question. Like, and there's purpose and integrity around leadership in that. So I think everybody kind of understanding that and coming into it understands that like at any given Sunday, we're going to do something crazy and we're just going to do it because it's going to be awesome. And like, it might come down to like 5 minutes before doors open before we get it working. But at the same time, it's like when it happens and you're in that moment, you see that thing that you've had to work so extra, like super extra hard on and in a random week come to life. And you're like, wow, this is a really cool, special moment that we see a lot of other people in this room just kind of experiencing and getting to experience. It's like, it's worth it all. Yeah. The mentality of kind of just working for Christmas and Easter, it'll get you in a bind because it'll get you non-complacent. You'll find other things that bother you about maybe your day to day. So I think it's like really important that you understand that being creative weekly is a really important thing for not just like your job, but also like your mental health. Like
And I'm sure it's like you know, I can think back to, you know, my own time kind of in that creative space. Like it's a muscle that you exercise. The less you do it, the more foreign it feels,
Yeah.
and the more scary it is. The more you do it and you get used to like try something new, take a risk, like do something outside the box, you get more comfortable and like, you know, you build up the mental framework to try some of those things, and it doesn't feel so, you know, foreign and out, you know,
Yeah, that's
100%, right?
I would 100%. When I first kind of came on and working with Passion, that was very intimidating for me. Like, they're like, we're going to do what next week?
Right,
You
right.
know?
Yes.
And in a touring world, it's different because like you kind of have the whole tour. You kind of just run the same show
Right,
back to back, city to city. You load in the same gear, load it out. But with like managing a project that's different every week, it was very intimidating at first. But like just like you said, as it kind of became the norm. I mean, you could throw anything at me right now and be like, all right, cool, let's do it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's interesting.
And having those partners and those relationships and those kind of things, you know how to do it easier, I guess. So doing it more often is definitely helpful for developing you to be sharper, but also a more creative person week to week.
Totally.
Yeah, that's interesting. How, like, as ideas are being presented to you, because I think that's like I'm thinking about myself in that creative sense of like, how is my creative muscle on a daily basis in my own life, like being worked and stretched and, you know, all those things. Do you feel like it's, does it feel like collaboration, or does it feel like, hey, this is what we're doing, let's go do these things? Or like, how do you feel like your team or the crew, or even some of the, you know, the worship and other staff that's at Trillith managing, hey, we came up with this idea at main campus, we want to do it, can you make it happen? You know what I mean? Like, how do you feel like you manage some of the collaboration pieces versus when you're in that, like, I think of only myself, and when I think of like bad seasons or seasons in ministry, like where I've had just, you know, I've just been struggling or like working on mental health or like whatever it is and just having a rough time. I receive those as like, I receive it differently than when I do when I'm healthy and going like, oh yeah, let's jump into it versus like, dude, I can't even think about, I don't want to do another thing.
Right.
How do you feel like you guys manage that, or does it come naturally? Like, I just don't even know.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, I'm sure it's tough for a lot of people in certain seasons of their life. Like I think you touched on what you were saying, that it really depends on where you are personally. So it's really important that you're always kind of keeping up on those things in your mental health to make sure that you're preparing for those. But, I mean, yeah, it's great to be kind of in that process. You know, I still have meetings throughout the week with regular people at Passion's other campuses, and we kind of talk about, cool, this is great, this is what we want to do, this is going to be like this cool moment. Here's why it's going to be cool, because it's really going to encapsulate this part of the sermon and blah blah blah. And then it's, how do we do this together? So it's me and it's another PM from one of the other campuses, and all the producers from all 3 locations in Atlanta, all coming together and say, kind of talking about those ideas. How do we execute them well? What's different? We got to do it here because of this situation. So being like, having a creative team around you to also kind of like share those passions and those things that you want them to see come to life, creates for like a great opportunity just to get it done and do it well and enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
So
how, okay, that leads, like, I'm thinking about, so if you guys are stretching that creative muscle like all the time, or the teams that are doing this all the time, like, how the crap do you come up with something new and innovative like that when you're changing it so much, right? Because I used to think that of just the 3 or 4 times a year that we would do those things. I'm like, man, how do we come up with something that's even better or different that doesn't seem like we're running the same playbook that we ran 3 years ago here? And we're like, oh, maybe people won't remember.
Yeah,
they remember. I remember. You know,
I think it's it's definitely important to have people who are kind of developing those, like it's very important to have a great creative director or somebody who's creative, not just from a worship standpoint, but a production standpoint, who's kind of always thinking about what's the next cool thing we can do to kind of help, you know, build the vision together. It's tough. I know in a lot of churches where you're short-staffed, you're basically just trying to get through Sunday to Sunday and to even sit down on a Tuesday and go, cool, what's something we could do in 2 weeks from now in this sermon that's going to really like be different, you know? I think it's really important that you find inspiration in your day to day, but even if you can't, you don't feel like you have the bandwidth to do it, partner with somebody who's probably within just the staff at church who kind of has that vision, has that drive, and has the bandwidth to kind of give you some stuff. I think it's really important that you just keep at it. There's.
I think it goes back to that muscle idea of just like, it's a practice that you have to like seeing the world in a creative way of like, not just what is, but what could be. Like that's a skill that you have to develop and like work at. And so even if you're at a, in a context where you feel like you're the only one and you have, oh, we did this thing last Christmas, we did this thing. And it's like, what am I going to do? Just even start by saying, what if I took this little component and this little component and put them together? It's something different. I'm not reinventing the wheel, but I'm trying to like take things that we've tried and like worked well, and I'm kind of giving them a new life. And like you kind of put those pieces together, and no piece of art or no like creative thing is like completely from scratch. Like that's just not real. Like everything is building on stuff that's come before it, whether it's your own work or someone else's work that you really respect. Like you're taking pieces that you've seen that really resonate with you, and you're kind of reforming them. And so not trying to I think having the pressure of like coming up with something totally original is just not real.
Yeah.
No.
Everything is some variation of something else. 100%.
Right? Everybody's inspired by something else. So I think in any major designer's world, they were inspired by something that they saw that somebody else created, which then gave them an idea to do something on their own, and then kind of developed it from there.
Yeah.
I mean, your example of like, you're specifically working in Atlanta at Passion City, the organization you work for is also doing stuff obviously outside of the church, but then also like you do a bunch of work with transformation. The story of the Adele Rain thing from their tour is a like perfect example. I don't know if you know this or not, but like, can you explain what they wanted to do, what the church wanted to do, coming up with this idea and going, okay, let's figure out how to make it, work, and kind of what you guys ended up doing.
Totally. And there is definitely like the, I just got to say this too. 46 has the mentality, and we all kind of within the couple of us that are kind of the creatives at the entertainment side, kind of share that, like, if it sounds crazy and everybody else says no, we say yes.
Yeah.
And that's the mentality, and always been the mentality with this company. And that's why I enjoy working with them, is that like, there's nothing you can throw at us that we were like, cool, we'll figure it out. We're going to do this. It's going to be amazing. So, one of the other churches that we work with is Transformation Church in Tulsa. And they kind of, through COVID, I think we all kind of saw how all those creative ideas came together, and they were just doing that all internally. And it was amazing. Like it was really some true creative people doing amazing things just within the camera, So then when they started kind of coming back into, let's bring people back in the doors, they needed somebody who shared that vision with them to do it actually physically in a space. And that's kind of where 46 came in, and they would throw anything at us, and we just figure it out. And the story behind that rainfall thing is there was a sermon coming up where I think they wanted to talk about essentially the falling of something in the sermon, and they saw that, were inspired by that, and say, how do we get that? And we figured it out. We found it, we put it on a boat.
It was the actual one that was used on was it European?
It was
tour?
It was Adele's system that was finishing over in Europe that we put on a boat and brought it over and got it in Tulsa and loaded it in about a week. So
that's like, it's crazy.
It's crazy, but we did it.
Yeah. And to like context it for most church people, like your Adele rainfall system is going to look different. Like what that means in your context is probably a different scale, but there's something that would sound to you if someone proposed it as crazy as that sounded to you guys.
Yeah. Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like everything's a matter of scale, right? There's something that's as crazy to you as that would be for,
the same
your
feeling.
team.
It's
the same feeling that kind of like, oh, I don't know how this is going to work. Yeah. But kind of, again, developing that instinctual sort of response of not, no, we can never do that, but let me think about that. Or like, let me make a call, or let's see what that could look like.
Yeah.
And, that just builds trust. Like even whatever you come back with, even if you come back with a, hey, no, or hey, it's got to be a little different, you're still building trust with that leadership because you didn't say no right away. You like saw the vision and you did the effort to figure out what aspects of it could be brought to life.
Right.
And so, it's a win-win either way, no matter the outcome, because again, the focus is not necessarily only about what thing do we do at the end. It's what kind of healthy collaborative process got us to that place.
Right.
Right. The ending is only one piece, and maybe not even the most important piece compared to what kind of like relational, creative rapport you guys are building and trust within the team.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it kind of goes back to replace artist from a secular world with creative pastor or head pastor who has just as much passion and to making their sermon come to life as an artist would that wants this show to be their art, you know? I think just having that same mentality, it's the same thing. It's just tick for tack. You know, I mean, you're just basically showing up, willing to do whatever it takes to get there and figuring it out together. That partnership and that trust build, I mean, really can inspire you for years to come and also develop your skills to be even better at your job than just being complacent and getting to Sunday, you know?
So what does it look like? You know, I think when I was talking about the creative part and wanting to be complacent, you know, that's like, obviously it's different seasons, you know, for me that I've experienced of like not wanting to do crazy stuff. But I think sometimes, and I think back to, you know, different scenarios where my complacency came out of me trying things or wanting to do things that were shut down and shut down and shut down and shut down because there's like this, it's a both and, both like coming from the top down, hey, we want to do something crazy. Also us pitching up, hey, we want to do this thing crazy. And then it gets, you know, shut down. Like, do you?
That's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a very real thing. I think it's like that is really hard. And I think the majority of people that I would say that would listen to this would say, I'm not in the transformation boat. I'm not in the Passion City boat. Yeah. That's the 1%, right? Of so much, but that's why it's so cool. Yeah. But then like, how does that like scale back for these guys or girls or whoever in different seats in ministry that are like, I want to do this thing. I want to make this better. I have a vision, but the other people around me can't see it, or they're not ready to get on board, or they're not like, they're not down to do any of that. Like, that's just not our vision. We're not passion. We're not transformation. We're not blank. You know?
I would say this to them, just take production out of it. Your role in church is not just developing some cool set and twinkling some lights and making this amazing Christmas experience week to week. You're also a minister to the people that are coming to the building. So turn your attention to creativity into being a minister in that seat as a production director or even just an audio guy or lighting person. Like, you were called into church not just to do production, but also to lead people and kind of develop relationships. So in that same sense, if you're hitting roadblocks from a creative standpoint, from a production standpoint, reposition your opportunity to minister to people that are coming to your church every week. And I think you can have just as much creativity and develop just as much cool stuff that keeps you alive just doing that.
Well, it also builds trust with leadership. Like if you are able to, because within whatever ministry seat you have, there are things that you have control over. It may not be as much as you want, but you do have things that you have influence and you have control over. And if you're demonstrating that you have put the effort in to really operate at a really high, reliable, consistent level of excellence and investment, both in like whether it's with teams and volunteers or process systems and maintenance and making sure that things are prepared and organized, and like you're demonstrating your ability at the things that are entrusted to you. Well, again, it's like anything. Like as you demonstrate that, more opportunity is more likely to be offered because you've kind of proven yourself in these incremental ways, so that when you come and ask for, you know, something that feels really big, well, you've got this track record of delivering and being trustworthy and reliable and like, you know, in these other areas. And even if it's just like, wow, I finally figured out a more efficient way to prep this element of the service every week so that I have more free time to maybe invest in my team or volunteers, whatever. It's like those things all add up to demonstrate your competency in the area that you've been entrusted with.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's definitely tough. Like I feel that. I feel that for the small church who's like, hey, I want to just add 4 lights on bars at my stage to make it a little bit better. And their creative pastor or their head pastor is like, well, what's that? We don't need to do that. What's that for?
And then I would say, like, have you used the lights that you do have as best as you possibly can?
Sure, 100%. Like if it's just like a matter of like taking the 4 little like Fresnel Lecos I got up in the sky and doing something fun with them or something unique with them and just slowly developing, using the tools you have at hand to kind of exude that creativity.
We would always talk about like, we're not going to upgrade tech or like invest in a new system until the system is the stopping point, not the operator or the user. Like if my operator is not using whatever console or lighting rig or video system to its max, then why would I buy a new? Like I want to invest all of the human like skill and training into using those things so that that's not the limiting factor. And when the gear becomes a limiting factor, now you can maybe think about changing it.
And that's a great problem to have.
But like
when you're at a point in creativity and you're now just running into hurdles with your equipment, that's when you're at a good point. You've built that trust with your leadership.
But don't so many churches say like, oh, we're not good in this area, and they're like, well, we just need a new console. Well, it's like, no, you don't always need it. Like, have you the training, the skill set, like developing the knowledge of your team, like, are you using it to the best of your ability?
Yeah. I mean, so this reminds me of when I think it was you were talking about Band Camino, or maybe it was you. You guys both went to the same show, but I think it might have been you unintentionally. And talking about like you're standing in front of a house, you're listening to a band that all three of us love, right? Yeah. And they're mixing, and it's one of the best mixes that you had heard, the way that you described it to me. You look over, the guy's mixing on what was M32R, like some
CL5.
Small, right? Like just nothing. Just
the two bands before that opened were on the X32.
Oh yes, you saw this. Yes, so that the one show we saw together was CL5, but then I saw the band Camino before me and Caleb were at the same show in United Center in Chicago. Yes, on the Dan and Shay tour. Yeah, and the guy mixed the crap out of them with a compact M32.
Yeah.
And I walked up to him and I said, "That sounded better than Dan and Shay said. What were you doing?" I was like, "I don't know, man. Just making the tools I had work." You know.
I remember one of the most fun, energetic shows I saw in Minnesota a couple years ago. It was the local band on an M32 with powered EV speakers on sticks in a parking lot.
Yep.
The thing slammed. It was awesome.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I will say, we can only do so much as technical people to make it great. A lot of that also comes from the source that's coming down the pipe, you know? Yeah. So, I mean,
that's
I am a huge fan.
Like, our broadcast doesn't sound good. We should buy a broadcast that's like, maybe you should tune your drums.
Yeah, tune your drums. I have to start with the guitar. Maybe that's a good one, you know?
Oh my gosh.
But so no, it's also like important to like find inspiration outside of your week to week too. Like, for example, we love that band. We love that music. We went to that show and it's just like, doing those things. It doesn't have to be like a live concert per se, but go to see a comedy show or go to see a movie that inspires you.
It's like seeing creatives operate in a realm that's not your day to day.
Right.
Like getting out of your normal rhythms and just seeing other expressions of creativity is just so helpful.
It's going to bring you back to what you do week to week and be better at it. So.
Like, and it can, I think, we're talking kind of in the production realm, but music, like even think of people that are more communicators, like pastors and, executive leadership and people that are communicating, like look at other venues of communication outside of what you do, whether that's comedy or other creative venues like theater, like all these different expressions of creative communication, but not preaching on Sunday, right? But like, what are the overlaps and the ideas that kind of can be shared between any form of like verbal communication to people?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think. I find myself, or found myself in seasons like when I'm trying to think of something new or be creative, like I'm looking in the same place of like what I'm trying to do it in. Like if I'm going to go look at what Elevation's doing or what Passion did last year or what Transformation did and like all these big churches that I would look up to instead of looking outside to go, hey, when's the last time I went to a show? When's the last time I went to a comedy club? When's the last time
I was doing like church stage stuff all the time? My favorite thing to look at was what did SNL do? Because they have to come up with like these crazy sets every week.
They are the standard
for artists, and it's like the speed of creativity is just very unique.
It's a perfect example.
And so it's like, I'm not going to do exactly what they're going to do, but there's an element of that idea conceptually that I could pull and do in this context.
100%.
And it's just a great, again, outside of my context that you can learn from.
It's a great example that I'm glad you brought that up because SNL, not just from a production standpoint, but also just from like the show, they put it together in a week.
Dude, it's crazy.
Sometimes they're writing up until they go live to air and they're feeding them brand new lines to the actors. Like it's insane. It's probably the most creative house that just runs at a full pace speed to kind of develop this thing. And some stuff hits and some stuff misses, but it's all like a learning process. It's a great example.
Yeah, that's crazy. I have seen a handful of stand-up comedy like behind the scenes and like all these guys and where they came from, and so many of them were coming from SNL and just writers, and they were grinding as interns and then moved their way up through SNL and writing incredible content that is like the most staple things that you can think back back into the 90s and early 2000s of things and skits and things that you saw on SNL, and you're like, dude, these people wrote that are now doing crazy stuff today because of the insane creative like world that they had to live in to
Correct.
like actually.
And I think the way to like to kind of bring that into the ministry context is, I think the thing I would focus on that is time, right? Like those people invested time. And it's like, does the grind look the same? Does the hours look the same? I hope not, probably, for most church staff, that you're not doing exactly the like intensity of what like an SNL writer is doing.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. But like that took years of investment and like honing their craft and building relationships. And it wasn't like an overnight thing. And so to have that patience and that understanding of, you know, not this kind of false conception of, oh, I'm just gonna like show up and have it all together and be like, everyone's gonna think that all my ideas are great. It's like, no, like there's a process and there's an investment of effort and relationship in that.
100%. Yeah.
That's crazy. So as you're at Passion now, like what things are you guys working on now leading into this next season? You know, it's like coming into the end of the winter season, spring. Like what are the upcoming things that you can at least talk about that are special, or, you know, things that you're working on?
Or what's scaring you? Like
Or
you're looking down the
scary,
city, like, oh man, how are we gonna do that?
Oh my gosh.
No, I mean, those are great questions. I mean, what I think the most exciting thing for the church, especially at Trillith right now, is that we're moving to 2 services at the end of the month. And that's just a huge accomplishment. I think we're also just trying to celebrate that a lot.
Yeah.
So we're doing, planning on doing little get-togethers after our gatherings to like really not just celebrate going to gatherings, but having that be a moment for our church to kind of get together and being community together. So developing little projects, setting up little experiences throughout just the spaces that we work in just for that celebration. That's one of them that we're coming up. A lot of the the stuff that we are looking for the spring are kind of coming off a conference. Conference was a crazy, amazing experience this year for a lot of people who went and got to see it. So I think kind of they've been in a section of talks kind of developed from what they talked about at conference and kind of pushing that into our normal congregants and kind of be able to. So the visions around that and kind of executing the creativity around what happened at conference throughout the next couple of talks.
Yeah.
And then nothing really crazy for Easter yet I've heard of, but like they're the kind of team that's like, we can put together Easter in 2 weeks because we're used to just like, let's do it. Let's do whatever it takes. Sure. And so my day-to-day, I think is, you know, a lot of thinking ahead as well, especially for my space. I would say that, you know, especially for a lot of people who are directing churches or production directors in spaces that they work in every week. I think the biggest thing for me personally that I've been focusing on that's been helpful is not just being ready to be creative and also, but like thinking ahead, being very intentional about thinking about when something can go wrong, what that thing is, what would you do to kind of prepare that situation. For me, it's been a big growing thing for me. It's kind of thinking through and being a good leader is trying to like think about what could go wrong. How would we handle that situation? As an example, we had all our HVAC go out in Town Stage about 2 weeks ago, right before the Sunday gathering.
Jeez.
And yeah, and the first thought was like, okay, how do we get this fixed right now? And I started calling some of my partner vendors. We had 225K HVAC units on site within a matter of hours getting set up and piping in hot air because it was so cold in Atlanta that week. But
that's crazy.
You didn't realize that you were not just a production manager; you were also an HVAC technician.
Basically,
pretty amazing.
I mean, that's the mentality though. It's like I'm not just doing production. Yeah. Like,
well, I love that because you're not like that's not my job.
Yeah.
You know, it's not this mentality of like, well, that's someone else's problem. It's like, no. We're all invested in the same outcome.
Correct.
And like, I'll jump in and help however 100%. You know?
I joke about this with my crew at Weekly. I said I'm more of a furniture and experiences manager than I am a production manager.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. Like you're a partner, and
that's really cool.
Whether you're full time at the church or just a contractor or whatever it might be, you know, people want that same vision and execution out of you. Whether it's your job or not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, I don't just do production. Yeah, I know production. I can lead that production team. We can figure that stuff out. It's just tech. But at the same time, like being the answer, having an answer, being a solution for any problem will give you longevity for days. You know?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that it goes so far in your career, and this is in all areas, not just in ministry at all. I think just like showing up and doing the things that aren't just on your job description. I mean, that's like the most like, you know, thing that everybody in the world says, but there's so much truth to just showing up to something that's not your thing, or just going, hey, how can I help? Yeah. Or how can I do this thing? Because ultimately this goal, this vision, whether it's a event, a service, a gathering, whatever that thing is, like we're all trying to get the same thing. We're all wanting to have an incredible experience so people can experience the kingdom through the work that we're doing ultimately, and not just put on a show, not just do, whatever. So when you step up to add more chairs because there's way too many people that are walking in that you didn't expect, that's just what you do. It doesn't matter if you're the producer. You can have a headset on and run down there and grab more chairs if you have to, and still show call or whatever.
And I do that weekly. I mean, and like I have a headset on and I'm kind of helping the tech team manage the things when they come up. But I mean, those guys are developed and are great at their roles. Like they don't need a whole lot of babysitting. You know what I mean? It's working with the rest of the church heads, and that's the buildings team, and it's the local pastor, and it's your producer, and it's kind of just being the answer for that space for all things.
Yeah.
So when we went from about 800-ish people Sunday up to 1,000 these last couple, like we're pulling chairs off racks, and I'm down there with them trying to pull chairs out and set people down and guide people in and say, well, look out for this thing over here, So it's just being all hands in, and cool. and I understand that's a lot of pressure for some people to do more than just their current role. But I'll just say this, if you approach those situations and be all in and willing to help in any sort of way, you'll find very quickly that that trust and that development in your role won't just be limited as often as you think it might be.
So what's the most embarrassing thing that's happened to you so far at Trillith?
Oh, man. Listen, this is be hard for me to admit, but
cannot wait.
Obviously the level of excellence is there's a pressure on that for real. So we did an event that was it was a gala dinner last spring for one of the they do it's called the Real People Gala, and it's a bunch of people from around Trillith. It's all the movie partners. It's all them. We all get together and do this gala dinner to raise money for charities in the area. One of the things we did is we put an LED wall. The client asked us to put an LED wall outside. And they wanted it on a curve, which kind of do this really cool curvy thing. And they're going to have people be able to write on an iPad, and they can put their art literally in real time up on the LED wall. Really cool idea. And then a spring storm in Atlanta rolled through. And it didn't matter how much sand or how much engineering and ballasting we did for that thing. It blew over.
Oh, man.
Oh, my gosh.
So we lost about half of a wall that day. I think the saddest thing was that it fell into one of the cars that was on the Marvel set that was there and parked next to it.
Fell onto a car?
Fell onto a car, yep, and the panels completely dented the front of the car.
Oh my God.
Dude.
And I was freaking out. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a movie car. This is a relic. We're screwed. We're gonna be in so much trouble. And I called the guy who was in the car, and he goes, hey man, don't worry about it. We cut these cars in half every day. It's no big deal. We'll just put some Bondo on and call it a day.
That's crazy, dude. Yes. Oh my gosh.
So it was embarrassing, yes, and I had to answer for that and say, next time we do this, and it was a big learning lesson for me, because it was just man, we couldn't predict the weather per se, but what could we have done to make that better and make sure that it wasn't going to be a problem? Right. So now going into those situations, we're putting ground stack LED walls out there. We're really being integritous about knowing any scenario that could come at us and being ready.
Well, it goes back to what you were saying a minute ago about that investing time into not just what's coming right now and solving the immediate problem, but as you learn things, to think forward and to plan future of building that mental catalog of lessons, and not just respond okay, I'm so glad that's over. What's next week? And I'm moving on to this thing, and just don't want to think about that embarrassing moment anymore.
Right.
But what am I learning? How am I growing from that?
Yeah, I still think about that moment all the time.
Yeah, it's good. That's a good story though.
But it keeps me hungry to be better at what I'm doing. So,
but I think that's something that people listening to this maybe they're not in production, but maybe they're a creative or a communicator or a designer or something like that. And it's really easy to want to just take the things that didn't go well and just put them out of your mind.
Yeah.
Right.
And just move past them and whatever. But so much of thriving as an artist and thriving as a creative is leaning into those hard things and really internalizing them and viewing them as opportunities and not as just
100%.
Stuff that you don't want to think about anymore.
I would say even the good and the bad. That was a bad experience that I learned from. But there's even something goes perfectly to plan. Having that mentality of how could that have been better? You know what I mean? We did it. But,
or even not how could it be better, but why did it go well?
Right.
I don't want to stumble into it being successful. I want to know intentionally what the steps were so that you can then replicate it. Because you can accidentally have a great event, but then that means that the next time, how confident are you that you're going to have the next great event?
Correct.
It's you want to do it on purpose and not on accident.
Yeah. Learn what you do well and be able to challenge channel that and learn what you do wrong and learn how to get better at it.
Right.
Yeah, that's good, man. I'm an Enneagram 6. Let's go sixes. Let's go sixes. Where we think the world is going to end, like basically all the time, and so we are trying to be the most prepared for it. That it's like debilitating, because you're like, well, there could also be this random scenario where a tornado comes through. But it's going to be 70 degrees in sunny, but it's possible that there could be a tornado that comes through.
That LED wall would have never fallen down. If you were
maybe not, but who can really say?
You should have seen that storm.
But it's like, how do you? It's just working through the what ifs. But then also being okay with the what ifs and not knowing, because it's the unknown that for me or my personality, I don't like to have unknowns. I want to have all of the constants and I want to see them all in front of me.
Totally.
And being okay with like walking into an unknown scenario and or unknown with like, hey, we've done our best to prepare everything that we possibly can, and the random acts of God that may happen through this thing. We're like, we're gonna figure it out, because nobody can prepare for that, after you've done, all those things.
Yeah, and to speak to I love sixes, by the way. Sixes are some of my favorite people because they are worried about the things that, and I'm a 3, so I'm like the super creative, let's make the dream happen kind of person. So having sixes surrounding me is the best, because they'll think of that scenario and I'll go, that's great. Actually, let's do this for that. And having a good team of people who are thinking about what could go wrong, and people thinking are dreaming with you, are also really important to have a healthy team. So I think you have and harness those people and make sure that they're doing those things that are helpful to the team dynamic.
That's good, dude.
Yeah,
man. I feel like there's so many like good nuggets out of this. I think just like in the creative space for people that are thinking about how to continue to innovate while not killing yourself or not killing your team. And being okay with people coming to you with new ideas and being open to that, and then being like having the strength and ability to push yourself to go, hey, let's push our team to maybe try something that we haven't done before. I think it's so awesome. So it's cool to like hear all of those things and kind of what you're doing down there, because it's one of the most unique church scenarios I can think of, in the country, and how you guys are doing ministry from, a weekly basis. So it's really cool to, hear that and talk through some of the stuff, man. So it's been awesome to have you come out and do this and hang with us, man. It's a blast.
It's been great. This has been a dream of mine to come hang out with you guys, because you're some of my favorite people when it comes to church ministry, and not just from a technical standpoint, but a great technical partner to have, but also just love you as people. So thanks for having me, guys.
Love you.